Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art Mumbai, and thank you for a fantastic day one yesterday. It's been an amazing experience, I think, for so many of us. I've heard wonderful feedback from all of you. So, thank you for being here, and thank you for your support. I'd like to just start off very quickly by saying a vote of thanks for Kiran Nadar and the KNMA team who have sponsored our speaker events. It wouldn't have been possible without them. And of course, to Birla Opus for having us build out the separate auditorium for the art fair. And with that, I would like to jump in with a very, very brief introduction to our panel. And I will then hand off to Kabir Jhala, who will be moderating the panel with our wonderful group of speakers. Today's panel is called Rising Power. And I won't go into the details of it too much, but just to pick up from the last panel that took place, where Amin Jafar spoke about India as a subcontinent and the amount of economic power that it held and the amount of social capital that it held. We're talking about the sort of 16th century, late 16th century, early 17th even, where India accounted for almost a third of the global GDP. And it sounds like a very large number, but the fact is that based on several projections today, India is set to be on the course to becoming the world's third largest economy in the next 6 to 7 years. This has led to a significant increase in demand for what we call treasures, which are essentially high-end objects such as art and other collectibles. And what this panel is really going to do is talk about the changing modes of circulation, of management of wealth, how some of the rise in spending has affected the art market and the art market for South Asian art, both in India as well as globally, compared with, in some cases, what's happening in other parts of Asia or in other parts of the world. And just in terms of what we're looking at going forward is what does this mean for us on not necessarily the art market side, but the other side of it as well? How does it affect, the economic balance? Where do we look when it comes to the arts? Where does the support for the arts come from? And how we expect the entire ecosystem to grow. So with that, I would like to introduce Kabir Jhala. He is a London-based journalist, and a fantastic one at that. And he is the art market editor of the Art newspaper, which is a journal of record for the international art world. He oversees the publication's coverage of galleries, fairs, auctions, as well as the intersections of politics, law, and finance, along with the art trade. He travels frequently to the subcontinent and reports widely on South Asian art. He's moderated panels, given lectures, at several locations, including the Royal Academy of Art, the Courtauld Institute, and the Sotheby's Institute, as I said, among others. And I'm proud to welcome Kabir, who will then introduce the rest of your panelists. Thank you.
Hello there.
Hi.
Before I introduce the panelists, I'm just going to give a brief introduction into what we're talking about in our Indian art market session. Thriving, roaring, and gangbusters are just some of the adjectives that have been used in recent news headlines to describe the Indian art market. It would indeed seem that we are in the midst of a new boom in Indian art. There is data to back this up. In 2023, the value of art traded at auction in India reached $183 million, or around 1,500 crores. That is a figure which is expected to only increase this year. While it is a modern category that is seeing the most substantial rise in price, the contemporary sector is being lifted too. For the most expensive artists and the top end of sales especially, last year, the collective sales of India's 50 most commercially successful living artists reached about 300 crores, or around 36 million US dollars, marking a 19% year-on-year growth. All this is taking place as the global art market itself actually contracts by many measures. The latest UBS Art Basel survey observed that recorded sales of art last year globally dropped by 4% to 65 billion. Next week, bellwether evening auctions in New York will bring a noticeably thin selection of works to the block. The topic at hand today is quite broad and throws up a lot of questions, but luckily we have an extremely qualified panel to answer them. And each panelist comes to today's subject from a different viewpoint and with different vested interests in the Indian art markets. Is going to make for a quite dynamic and broad range of views. So firstly, to my left is someone who likely needs no introduction in today's talk, not least because he is really the reason that you're all gathered here on this race course, but we'll do it anyway. Dinesh Vazirani is the co-founder of Art Mumbai and the chief executive and co-founder of Saffron Art, one of India's leading auction houses. Through both businesses, he is heavily involved in the primary and secondary markets of India and has been a key player in building up the secondary market, especially of Indian art. And he has set, through his auction house, a number of records for the subcontinent's artists. Then to his left, we have Anders Petterson, the founder of Art Tactic, which is an art market research firm that is the first of its kind to crowdsource sales data to create reports analyzing art market industry trends. Anders has the eternal gratitude of art market journalists like myself for attempting very well to bring transparency into what is a notoriously opaque industry. And, as our overseas guest, he is going to also be able to give us a macro zoomed out view of where India sits in the global context. And finally, we have Samsuddha Majumder, a lawyer based in Delhi who specializes in tax, including customs duty and foreign trade. And he works with a number of art businesses and foundations, and we hope he can give us some key insights into the sort of shifts in law and public policy and how they're affecting the art trade. So I want to begin this panel by asking all three of you the same question, and I want you to respond in just about a minute before we use those responses to go more in depth and have a discussion around the art market. Since economic liberalization, the Indian art market has witnessed several periods of expansion and intensified trading, as well as several periods of downturn. What, in your opinion, makes the current moment that we're in distinct?
I think the difference today is that art is not looked at as a speculative asset. In the past, you used to have people buying it and trading it. It almost became like a stock. But today, it's actual consumption. People are buying art as collectors to hang in their home, are taking the time to educate themselves, learn more about it, and making educated decisions. So I think it's a fundamentally different market from the previous market. And the reason why there were contractions in the past was because it was speculative. You had dealers buying art and reselling it in 3 months and 6 months. Here you have collectors who held the art for a long time and now really engaged with the market, unlike the past. From the view of consumption, then speculation.
Thank you, Dinesh. Anders?
I think probably looking back on this, it was 4 years since I was here last, and actually incredible how much has changed, the energy. But I would say infrastructure has changed. Well, Art Mumbai is an example, but the building of institutional infrastructure, major collectors, philanthropic efforts, etc., I think is one of the things that is going to create a more sustainable market. And I think it's linked to Dinesh's thing about speculation. I think there's a realization that art as a pure asset is probably not the best way to look at art, and that you're going to have, bring in emotional, aesthetic, cultural element to it. And I think for that you need institutions, you need education, and you need to have the opportunity to be able to engage with art. And I think that's, on its right trajectory.
Obviously, earlier in today's talk session, we heard from 3 leading institutions in the region, and we'll be able to, in this talk, delve into a couple more private foundations that are emerging. And lastly, Sam, same question to you.
So while I'm not obviously an expert on the art markets as such, but from what I see, there are a couple of things. I think the growth of the second level of the upper middle class, and if you look at the number of people who are filing income tax returns above a crore, is almost doubling every 3 years, right? So that is a segment that can get into art for, like Dinesh and Anders said, for consumption, for their pleasure and for understanding. And I think part of it is also demystifying it to a great extent, that people like Saffron Art have done, which online auctions, as well as the fact that art is more accessible for people to understand. I think even as a layman or as a person who is interested in art, but probably put off by the arcane, things that people don't understand, that is sort of disappearing bit by bit.
Thank you. I would actually like to use that notion of an increasing upper middle class as a way to then ask Dinesh, you obviously have the behind the scenes view into who is buying, especially at auction, but also now in the primary market at this fair. One thing that has really dominated the Indian art market for so long is that the pool of collectors has been quite small. Are we now finally seeing a lot of new wealth and new people coming into the market?
Yes, of course. I think the wealth generation in general in India, especially after COVID, has been tremendous. Businesses are doing well. Entrepreneurs are building new businesses, and now suddenly there's a social pressure that if you are wealthy and you don't have art, it isn't looked upon very well. So it's almost that you have to have good art in your wall. You're buying these expensive homes, and you can't have art which is not kind of art for art's sake. The other thing that we find is tier 2 cities are generating an enormous amount of wealth. And even from our auctions, we find the number of buyers from, say, Chennai and Hyderabad and Bangalore, just increasing every month. So I think aside from the wealth generation, there's also a pool of younger collectors who are now engaging with art. I mean, even at the fair yesterday, you found so many young collectors who wanted to engage. And I think that's just building a new set of collectors for Indian art.
I totally agree. I think actually age and geography are two very defining factors of this new pool of collectors coming in. Actually, I noticed at Nature Malt's booth, they're offering a Subodh Gupta sculpture for I think 2.8 crores, and that went to a collector from Nagpur. That's not even a tier 2 city. So you see this wealth creation all over the country. Actually, Sam, could you maybe attest to that in some way as well when you work with clients? Are they also coming in from sort of, not just the centers of Delhi and Bombay and
Definitely.
Chennai?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we see a lot of clients from tier 2 family wealth funds, joint family who own their own businesses. They are interested in buying art. They're interested in understanding the legal landscape around holding and collecting art. So we do see that, and I echo what Dinesh has just said.
But what do their tastes like, Dinesh, as well? Because are they initially looking to buy their first modern, so like their first Raza, or are they interested more in contemporary art that speaks to their own generation?
So I would break that up. I think people, say from the bigger cities like Mumbai, where you're buying homes for like 50 crores, 70 crores, 100 crores, I don't know how much, look at the moderns because they can afford it. But the younger lot are looking at contemporary. And it's about time. The contemporary market has been stagnant for almost like 15 years or a decade. Even at the fair, the contemporary galleries are all selling out. Because the price points of modern have reached levels where it's only a select few that can afford them. So, I think as young collectors come in, you'll see the contemporary market change dramatically.
I want to talk about a shift as well in buying patterns in terms of going digital and online. Obviously, COVID was a huge game changer in a number of ways for art buying. And one of them was that people really became far more accustomed to buying online. And we saw that as a trend that stuck even after the lockdown lifted. I want to first ask you, Dinesh, because your auction house actually went online, from the get-go. It was much predated COVID. Have you noticed shifts in buying patterns since COVID?
Yes, tremendously. I think what happened during COVID was people were at home, and the home became a very important part of their life. Secondly, they had the time to research, and online was the easiest thing to do. In fact, what we did, we used to do one auction a month, and we started doing 2 auctions a week during COVID. And I think that engagement with people brought in a whole set of young buyers, like I said. And as soon as the COVID was over, you found people that they came into the market educated because they'd spent that time learning about art. It wasn't just going to buy something on impulse. They actually did their research. So I think there's a fundamental shift in the market after COVID.
How do you, though, because obviously there is a shift online in terms of buying, how does that sit with you as a fair director? Because obviously this event, it requires an in-person interaction with art. And to some extent, art fairs are at odds with a shift online. How do you navigate those two strands of your businesses?
The Indian art market is very different from the West. there's blurred lines between primary, secondary, online, offline, and there are gallery owners doing auction houses having galleries. So that blurred line in India actually has worked well because it's just become a more cohesive market. It's not a fractured, divided market that you're on one side and I'm on the other. So I think you can wear all kinds of hats in India.
Nice. You heard it here first. And Anders, I want to talk as well about this online shift because globally what it's done is it's actually affecting the sort of lower tier, I believe, of art sales. Just for a bit of global context, part of the reason that the art market right now globally has contracted is because those top lots, sort of $5-10 million plus, they're completely going off the market because no one wants to trade in what is very unsure time. But we're seeing also an expansion of a lower tier of art being traded.
I mean, it's interesting to look at the numbers. I mean, the optics from the global market perspective is that it's been significantly 2 very tough years. 2023 was hard, but 2024 looks even worse, which is a completely opposite trajectory to what India is experiencing. I think the interesting thing with online is that the West, I would say the major auction houses took 15 years to do what Dinesh did in 2000. And it's partly also to do with this, almost the rule book you talked about is a little bit more open, a little bit more chances to do different things. There's not so much set ways. I think the art world has been, very resistant to innovation in general, which makes them very slow at adapting. They had to adapt during the COVID and the pandemic, which changed radically. And I think that has opened up a real new avenue for going back to new buyers. I think the problem with the current art market, as we see in the West, particularly with the sort of the top end of the market, is that you have 4% of lots sold, accounting for about 75% of the total value. That leaves 96% of actual volume accounting for the remaining, 25. So that, in a sense, that tells you there's not going to be that many people that can buy those 4%, which limits the audience that actually can be part of this market. And I think that's the biggest challenge that the Western world has, is that we're stuck in a framework that it's all about big prices, high value, and realizing that we need to do a lot to actually start to engage the next generation. And the online, to a certain extent, is addressing that. It is providing a better entry point and more accessible, less intimidating. You don't need to talk to anyone if you don't want to. You can get it shipped to your house, and more transparent in many ways. And pricing is becoming more transparent, easier to do the research. So I think, as I said, the interesting about online now, I mean, it's definitely here to stay. Even if we had a kind of a peak during 2020, 2021, the actual numbers, I mean, as I said, the market is about, last year was down, or actually first half of the year was about 27% overall. Online sales was up 14%. So again, you're seeing completely different trajectory in different types of the market. The problem is, as I said, the 4%, which is the 1 million plus market, completely overruns the optics of the market. It's just sort of, everything at the bottom is just a little flat line. And so this is where, obviously, being in the data business, we're trying to kind of bring out that the big picture is not always as gloomy as it looks like. And there's many, many stories, including India, but also places like Latin America, where things are actually happening.
Also, as we say, there are many art markets, not just one. So it's been about 5 years since you published your last in-depth art tactic report into India. So you briefly talked about some of the biggest changes that you observed having come back here. Maybe you can go a bit more in depth. You mentioned sort of a greater institutional presence, more private museums. It's undoubtable that there are more private museums coming up in the country. People try and make this comparison between India and China, obviously, two countries with huge populations. India's economy is now sort of catching up, not quite at that level, but certainly to some of its Western peers. In the early 2000s, we saw this explosion of private museums in China, and that hugely impacted the market domestically for a variety of reasons. I wonder if you can talk about how that interaction between growth of private institutions and the growth in the market, and whether we're seeing anything similar in India. Maybe you could just give us a point of comparison in terms of data.
Sure. So the last two reports, actually, the last one was in 2020, just prior to the pandemic. We shifted our research from coming more like an auction-based research, partly because we felt like the auction market wasn't sufficiently reflecting what was happening in the market overall. So we changed our tack to start to talk about art and philanthropy, which led us into lots of incredible initiatives. That's what's happening here in India and in South Asia in general, with regards to institutions, artist residencies, grassroots projects, bigger foundations and museums. And coming back to a little bit, I guess the importance of this. I mean, when we look at the art market, it's always from an ecosystem point of view. You can't really have a proper market unless these institutions are in place. Those are the ones that's going to educate us. Those are the places where we're going to experience art. I mean, if you don't have an art fair like this, simply having an auction is going to have a very limited audience. So it's incredibly important that this is happening. If you compare to China, as you said, the economy is an 18 trillion economy in terms of GDP, $1 million versus a 4 million. So actually all the size of the economy is massive. Big difference. Now, if you look at culture and creativity, and in terms of as a percentage of GDP, it's about 4 or 5% in China. It's about 3% here in India. But obviously, if you take 4% of a very big pie compared to the other, there's about $600 billion more going into the creative industries in China versus here. Now, that's a lot of potential infrastructure building that could.
And in terms of that $600 billion, is that between state and private? Do you have a sort of rough split between that?
No, it's hard. The only thing that you have is obviously getting data from China is not always that easy.
No, it's very hard to get data in China.
At least verifiable ones. But what I think was interesting it's the role of government. And I think there's probably quite a remarkable difference between India and China with regards to how they think about culture as a soft power, as an instrument for putting themselves on the international stage, not only economic, not only political. And if you look at what China did, was that in 2009, they elevated culture to one of the strategic pillars. In 2011, it was part of the long-term plan. And on the back of that, you started to see heavy investments in infrastructure, about 100 there was a number of thousands of museums being built around. It's hard to verify, but we found about 130 private and public museums of contemporary art being built. But 130 is quite a large number. They're going to be filled. There's going to be, art being acquired. So the infrastructure in China is at the scale that is so much bigger than it is in India. And obviously, this is with the help of the government, not only building, but also subsidizing, giving land, all of these things. And obviously, I think India, it's very much the burden is left onto the private sector to do this. And that's a heavy lift.
Absolutely. Actually, this is a great point. Of course, Dinesh.
I think the art market in India so far has been built without any government support. No support for taxation, no support for import duties, nothing. So it is now that the government is actually thinking about culture as a soft power, and they're taking the initiative to try to think of kind of giving small sops to the small art market to grow. One such thing was taxation. Capital gains tax on art used to be 22.6%. It's been brought down to 12.5%. So art, for the first time in India, is on the same level as other assets, whether it's stocks or bonds or anything like that. That's a big change. So I think unless the government does not step in, it will limit the growth of the Indian art market.
I want to attest to that point. I mean, in China, when we were seeing that big explosion in the early 2000s, there was a wonderful statistic. At one point, I think 2007 or 8, there was a museum being built every day in that country. But museums being put into sort of cultural or into housing complexes was completely subsidized. And that's why you saw all these museums proliferating. Sam, is there anything of this nature being offered to private philanthropists in India in terms of tax breaks?
So yes and no. So the exemptions that are available for private philanthropists are part of the larger exemptions available for a charitable or a framework which basically provides for charitable and educational trusts or foundations. So if you register as a charitable house, which we call a Section 12 AB company under income tax, and your objects are aligned with the objects which are allowed there, and one of them is art and education, and one of them is objects of general public utility, where arguably you could bring art into as well. In that case, anything that they receive as a donation is not taxed, and anything that they send out for any kind of philanthropic activity is not taxed. There might be taxes if basically more than 20% of their income comes from sale of art, for example. So it's like I said, it's a limited exemption, but it is available for purposes like that, but not limited to art.
One other thing that we talk about as a big shift in private philanthropy in India was the changes in sort of CSR, corporate social responsibility, in the last couple of years. Dinesh, maybe you can give us a bit of insight, if you want to, into what that maybe meant for private museums, having more of an onus to be more public facing, to collect art as well.
Just let me start a little before that.
Go ahead.
Okay, which is to have a private museum, you need to have space. You need a place where you can build a private museum. If the government does not, give public-private partnerships where they give you land and you can build a museum, it's very difficult for people to actually build museums. And the problem is with the government of India. I hate saying it, but it's true. There's mistrust that if we give land to someone, they're going to misuse it, use it for other purposes. So I think that level of mistrust has to disappear. As far as CSR goes, yes, it has helped a little bit, but I don't think art is up on that radar for CSR. I think unless people don't start thinking of art as something where CSR is accepted, it's going to be very difficult to actually get museums. Of course, there will be museums, and there are museums. We have MAP in Bangalore, Kiranadar Museum, which is coming up in Delhi, is going to be phenomenal in 2026. But all these, and there are small museums in Baroda, in Chennai. So they are coming up and people are taking the initiative. But like I said, unless the government does not give you the advantages of doing something philanthropic, it's going to be very difficult.
So just one question to Dinesh. Do you see more of them building new museums? Because what I have seen is that a lot of CSR is maintenance or helping maintain existing museums. So I've seen that if you go to a private art collection in, let's say, Rajasthan, that would be helped maintain by a CSR foundation.
Yeah, I think if you give it back to the government, they'll always accept it. So and they won't give it to private individuals as something to encourage.
In terms of the dialogue that the private art sector is having with the government, what does lobbying look like in this country right now in terms of, trying to speak to government officials and convince them that contemporary and even modern art requires boosts and help? Because obviously it does contribute to the economy eventually, but it needs that initial investment. Dinesh, maybe Sam as well, you might want to weigh in on what's these conversations are happening.
It's been impossible. Everyone has tried to go to the government and tell, we want to do this. A simple thing of the Kiranadar Museum of Art, who had a duty exemption if they imported works into India, import duty exemption for a museum, which was revoked 3 months ago. And there's no reason for it. If you are going to encourage people, where are you going to start? So for me, I think it's a long road with the government unless they don't put priority as culture as a soft power.
So very simple thing, I think, which the government usually says in such matters is that their priorities are currently elsewhere, right? And if you look at the central government, they are able to fund some things, but most state governments in our country are bankrupt. It's an unfortunate truth. They don't have the sources of revenue to support projects which they have committed to, which are infrastructure, energy, all these things. So going beyond that to projects which they will take up now is a big ask for a lot of state governments.
Anders, do you want to?
No, just on the point of CSR and as you said, how do you put culture into something that is equally valuable as other things, as health and education, etc. The same struggle I think we have in other parts of the world is for funding, for public funding where that exists, but also for CSR purposes is how do we demonstrate the impact of culture? And I think this is maybe where we not have to start to think about culture and creativity and art in a more holistic way, where we're looking at the intersection between health, mental health, and art. Social cohesion, and there's actually we're working on a project in the UK at the moment which is looking into these things, and there's a lot of scientific research into UCL has done things with regards to art in hospitals or culture in hospitals. There's a lot of regeneration evidence of the impact of that. So I think we need to and this is obviously from research and data, is that how do we demonstrate something? The problem a little bit is what we call this thing with philanthropy, which is trust-based philanthropy versus sort of a kind of corporate philanthropy where you have to demonstrate everything. The problem with demonstrating evidence all the time is very, very taxing on the institutions themselves, because what metric are you using? How are you going to demonstrate the impact? So it's finding that level of giving with the trust that the organization itself can figure out how to do that best and can engage it. I think that struggle with the CSR side it's a global one. I think it's an opportunity, and I think probably a massive, because here you have a compulsory 1% that could, if you took a tiny portion of that, it could be quite significant.
We've spoken a lot about how the issues facing India's art market in terms of things like taxation. But I actually want to pose maybe a different angle to this, which is that it's very difficult to import art into India, and that is what keeps you from seeing a lot of international art in India. You know, there are not very many international galleries who participate in Indian art fairs because it's very hard to bring the work in. There is a lot of, onerous taxation issues, and just shipping is a bit of a nightmare as well. However, it has inadvertently or deliberately created what I would imagine is quite a protectionist art market. Anders, would you maybe agree with that?
Yeah, probably. I mean, Dinesh is probably going to speak more to that, but I think on the strength side, I think India is building its own collector base. It's kind of protected from the kind of fashionability of the international art market, which every 2 years will change the country and move to something else, which I think is a good thing.
And which we saw really wreak havoc in India in like the last 15, 20 years, right?
Yeah. And so I think to have it, and this is compare a little bit to coming back to example with China. China has, again, a very strong domestic consumer collector base, which protects its own market. So that I see as a strength. I mean, from a trade point of view, you can probably, what that means, the fact that there is a kind of a protectionist, what that means for the size of the market, as maybe something.
I mean, I'm not sure it's really protectionist. I mean, I don't see any logic of an Indian painting which is painted in India being brought back into India and you pay an import duty. It doesn't make any sense. So, the same duty applies to Western art that's brought in. And yes, it has hindered a lot of Western art coming into India. I mean, here we are struggling trying to get stolen treasures back into India on the same way you're charging import duty when people are bringing it back into India. There's a dichotomy in thought. And unless that doesn't change, and there is that, China had about a 5-year, 10-year tax holiday to bring art back into the country. But we haven't taken the initiatives as a government, as a country, to really treasure and value our own artworks and our own culture and our own treasure. So I think it's just a mindset change that has to happen.
Mm-hmm. I think one question that we also ask is India ready to be a global art market? Because obviously I think we're all seeing initial signs of taste becoming more international. Dinesh, maybe you can actually talk about that at your art fair. There are a small handful of international galleries, even Indian galleries, very well reputed Indian galleries, are beginning to show more international artists. Maybe you can speak to changing tastes as well that are emerging.
Tastes have changed now. Say for example, the galleries here now, say Continua, they have Anish Kapoor and they have Ai Weiwei, and both have sold. So, it is Indians who are buying these works and have recognized these names. So I think the mindset of the Indian collector is going global because many of them already have good collections of art and they want to expand into other areas and other categories, look at different things. So it is changing, but infrastructure is so difficult. I mean, for galleries, international galleries, to really bring this art into India is painful. And unless that doesn't change, you won't see that the international art market thriving in India.
But then how do you convince an international gallery to come and exhibit at Art Mumbai?
Because of the buyers. They know India has strong, wealthy buyers, and that's changing dramatically. The wealth in India is incredible. So they know they can sell these works to Indians, even with all the problems.
Obviously, India's onerous tax structures, while they really hinder the art market, they are not unique, actually. A variety of countries across the world also have, very onerous tax structures. Anders, maybe you can talk to that, because, and give a comparison of maybe an art economy that India is more similar to. You were talking about Latin America, for example.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are similar. I mean, I'm not. You're probably more of a tax expert, but definitely, kind of, I guess, the fiscal regimes do, determine sometimes the size of the market itself. I mean, Latin America is again, very fragmented in terms of its sort of legal side. But you mentioned Brazil when we talked as a kind of a market also that is on its own trajectory now, but all very different from the global market, also different from many other parts of the world. But again, it's very hard to talk about Latin America as one continent with uniform economies. They're all on different, well, politically and so forth. But yeah, I mean, the fiscal side is as I said, not my greatest strength, but I do definitely, obviously, it plays a role in terms of reducing the friction. I think what we are looking at now is, I don't know exactly, maybe that's something I want to ask you regarding philanthropic and giving. We're working on a project now in the UK, which is about there's two schemes. One is called the Cultural Gift Scheme and one is called Acceptance in Lieu. And this is partly basically where collectors can start to, they can give to a museum, a public museum, as a gift and will then have tax reduction. I think this is something which the US has obviously had very good and nice tax breaks on donations. And I think if we're going to start to encourage philanthropy, there's going to be some fiscal incentives to do so. I think that's really important. And I don't know exactly, I wanted to ask you actually ahead of the talk,
That's a very interesting point. So I can take that up once you finish.
I think I'm finished, actually. Okay. I'll come back to it.
So that's a very interesting point that Anders raised. So giving, and that being a deduction for the company that is giving, obviously is a great incentive for corporate houses to donate art. However, in India, what is recognized as a CSR spend is not allowable as a deduction because it is recognized as an application of income. It's basically the shareholder giving a part of what they've earned to the society, right? Therefore, it's not actually allowable as a deduction. So if a company gives 40 crores of artwork to a museum, it would be CSR. It would fulfill that CSR budget, but it won't be a deductible for the company, and that is clearly a disincentive. So you're absolutely right. That is a disincentive for the company.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think this part is, as much as we talk about the transactional elements, I think also to build institutions for people to donate. Also, I think there's an opportunity for, as we've already seen, the collaborations between Kieran Nadar and Barbican, to also put works into museums around the world as a way to, but it's going to be an incentive, I guess, to do so. So I think in that regards, taxes are important, and as I said, not only transactional, but we need to build a better giving system.
So what happens in India is, I think it would be wrong to think that art is picked up for a very adverse tax environment. It is rather that there is no enabling environment for tax. It is treated just as any other asset. You own a car, you own a house, you own own art. It's basically the same. But the question is that art is unique in many ways that Anders and Dinesh has talked about. It has a very beneficial role on society beyond its actual value, right? So is there something more that the government could do? For example, you talked about capital gains. Capital gains is 12.5%. It's on art, it's on houses, it's on any capital asset. The GST rate is 12%. It could be better, it could be 5, but it could be worse, it could be 18, right? But the point is that you are not providing an environment which provides a greater impetus. That's the point.
What was it that drove the reduction in tax? Was that lobbying or?
So it's a reduction across the board, okay, which is again the point I'm making. It's not for art. It was a 20% capital gains tax rate for long-term capital assets. It has become a 12.5%. So, and what also they have done is that for this rate, you had to have waited 3 years. Now you have to wait 2 years.
One more point I want to talk about is we're always looking at ways to expand the art market. I wonder whether the Indian art market in any way needs to incorporate other sort of mediums. The Indian craft sector, for example, is worth billions compared to the Indian contemporary sector. I wonder whether we also need to sort of break down mediums to build up the industry. Dinesh, maybe you can speak a bit about that.
I'm not sure we can really break down mediums, but I think the general interest across the board, and whether it's handicrafts or whether it's craft or whether it's design, you see a great kind of interest in design nowadays. You have design fairs, like 3 in a month. So a lot of interest is coming into different categories. India firstly has an incredibly rich heritage. Across the board, whether it's indigenous art or whether it's contemporary art or whether it's modern art or sculpture or installation. I think people are looking and they are thinking that these things are of value, and Indians are very stuck with the notion of value. Unless they don't find something of value, they don't really get into it at all. So I think there is a little shift, but I'm not sure you could break it out. I don't know how to, at least.
If any of you would like to add to that. Good. My last question is actually going to ask you to forecast the next 5 years, look into your crystal ball, and tell me what you think the Indian art market is going to look like in 5 years.
It's going to be the biggest boom. I mean, just because there is so much wealth being generated, the demand and interest in Indian art is at its peak. I've never seen it like this. The engagement is at its peak. And secondly, supply is getting less and less. As you get museums that come up, museums kind of take away the works from the commercial market. They don't come back into it. So you've got these people who have the aspiration to own a Gaitonde or a Tayyab or a Raza, but you can't get it. So that automatically is increasing value. So I think we're going to witness from now an incredible boom, unlike the world market.
In the last boom, we saw a couple of things. As you mentioned, huge speculation, also a proliferation of fakes into the art market, which always happens when you get intensified trading. I want to ask in both senses, how are you, as a businessman incorporated very much into the art world, how are you safeguarding against speculation? And also, have you noticed more fakes coming onto the market?
Yes, many, many more fakes. And I think that's the one thing that might slow the market down a little bit, is that lack of confidence people have whether they're getting authentic work or not. But I think there's enough kind of expertise, and there's enough documentation. There's many more publications. There are many more places you can look and avoid those fakes. So I think that might have a little blip in the market, but it won't change the direction of the market.
And to my second question, which is, how are you preventing speculation from dominating the market like it did in the 2007 boom?
For one, speculators can't afford the prices anymore, so they're not going to buy it to speculate. It's all going to collectors who are paying the top prices and values. So I don't think it'll have an effect.
Even in the middle market?
Let's leave contemporary out, because most of them are living artists. So to get a fake contemporary work is very, very, very difficult.
It's done.
Yeah, it could happen. It could happen, but I think it's more with for Indian artists, more with the masters. And unfortunately, some of the masters had very little documentation in their lifetime. So there are estates, of course, which are putting together catalog resumes, other things that you can have some references. But
so an increased professionalization of the industry is going to prevent that.
I think so, yeah.
And the same question to you, look into your crystal ball, 5 years.
No, I think, as Dinesh said, I think you are on a interesting and probably quite rapid trajectory. I think there are pitfalls that we can look to the West and other markets to say, well, try to avoid certain things. I think rising prices is great, but if it doesn't trickle, then you're left with some very few artists. That's going to be the 4%, as I talked about earlier on. That's going to, I think, has two things. One, it will exclude people from entering the market because prices are too high, and because people are seeking quality in terms of value and investment value, then they are looking for the blue chip, and that's dangerous. The other thing is that when things becomes too expensive, there's going to always be people out there with some innovative new ideas. And what we've seen in the West is this notion of tokenization and fractional ownership, which are, I think if it's done properly, it can be a way of democratizing art investment. But if it's not, then it could also be a heavily kind of speculative investment. So you've got to be, sometimes when you create something that looks great, as I said, if it's not well distributed and open and accessible to everyone, someone's going to take advantage of it, and then the controllable aspect of speculation might be out of your hands. So I think booms are fantastic. It will create infrastructure. It will bring in more buyers. Just make sure you keep them there for as long as possible, because...
Can I add one more thing? I think the other thing, the only thing that might slow down the market, and you just touched upon it, Anders, is greed. Greed of collectors that want the highest prices, and greed of dealers that have no fear to quote those prices anymore. So I think it might, the only thing that might change it is when buyers themselves say, look, this is enough. I'm not willing to pay these prices anymore. So I think that's a responsibility that dealers and sellers have a responsibility to at least keep it at a level which is practical.
Sellers, including yourself as an auctioneer, right?
So I'm not talking about people who own the painting.
Right, okay. But when you're putting an estimate, for
I'm
example,
only a marketplace.
right. Okay. And Sam as well. What do you think the next 5 years might hold for Indian art?
Well, I think the experts have really answered that. But again, like they say, there is only an upward trajectory that we are seeing just because of the increasing buying power, the increasing amount of disposable wealth, increasing interest in art. So all of those things together, and just the fact that it is so much more accessible, and that barrier of I don't know anything about art is slowly disappearing, and people are, I think, also okay to say it now that I don't understand. I want to get educated. I don't necessarily have to start being an expert. I can visit the auctions. I can visit the fairs such as this, and I can learn about art. So I think the future is definitely going to be bright.
Thank you so much. I think we have some time for some questions from the audience. If anyone wants to raise their hand and ask. Yes, right there. Can we get a microphone, or should I hand my microphone over? What's the best way? Should I come down? Hello? I think we're getting a microphone to come. Oh, no.
We can do too, please. Okay, just share.
Sure. Thank you.
That's it.
Hello, thank you for this such an insightful session. I actually have a question for all three of you. It's the same question, but all of your perspectives matter on this. And this comes from a reading that I did recently. That was of 2014 by Philip Vermeulen, where he talked about that a lot of Indian buyers or a lot of buyers who have recently emerged have come from the BRICS nations. So I also want to understand from y'all's perspective, from the perspective of tax, from the perspective of someone dealing in the auctions and someone who is actually looking at the numbers of these, that what is the contribution of all these BRICS buyers, and has it been really the determinant factor, or it has been just one of the other determinant factor?
I go.
So I guess is your question how dominant have BRICS collectors been in the global market? Is that sort of the gist?
Right.
Of it?
Yes. Yeah.
Who wants to take that?
Lance.
And is your Mr. Global, Mr. Worldwide?
I ain't saying it.
Okay. There's very limited information, I guess, sort of on the buyer side of things, but we had some insight. We did a project with one of the auction houses 2 years ago, where we actually had access to bidding data, and just to give them the sense of the contribution from different parts of the world. And for this was predominantly both talking about in Western as well as Asian art, and it was about 30% or 40% US, 30% Europe, and 30% Asia. Now, the Asia wasn't broken down to, it might be predominantly Chinese, we don't know. But there is, which was even going back 5 or 6 years, was significantly lower. So there's clearly that there anecdotal as well as some evidence that the buyers, particularly in Asia, are dominant. Now, we're coming to the other BRICS countries, like Brazil, for example. Again, a strong domestic market. There are collectors that obviously are now, not only in Brazil, but in Latin America in general, are pushing certain artists such as Leonora Carrington, for example, the surrealist women artists. There's a new things happening there of discovery, also their own heritage, and putting value to it. So there's no doubt that going forward, that these group of countries will, as the Western world is stagnating in terms of changing demographics, etc. And I think as a challenge is that whether the Western world will actually manage to convince the next generation to get into art the same way as the previous. And I think this is the big question mark we have at the moment. Will the transition of wealth from the baby boomers to the next generation, will that mean that the next generation actually will pick up the same taste as their parents, or will they change? And I think the art world and the art market has a lot to do there. So I think there are opportunities here for young generations in this country. You're obviously a very young demographic that is increasingly coming into wealth. If you capture them, I think there's a huge potential to actually do something that the West is now struggling with.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have one at the front.
Dinesh, I have a question for you. You mentioned there are a lot more international galleries coming here, selling their art to Indians. The demand for us to collect international. Are you seeing in your auctions or in data that international collectors are collecting Indian art?
The Indian art market is predominantly driven by the Indian diaspora, Indians living in India and non-resident Indians living in different part of the world. However, I think there's been a slight shift where we have seen, not at the middle end, but at the top end, international buyers coming in. And I think this is a spillover of all these exhibitions like the Guggenheim with Gaitonde and the Tate doing Nasreen. So, I think with, non-Indians are starting to look at it, but I think we're still far away.
Is that collecting mainly institutional, or is it private collecting influenced by institutions?
Yeah, private collecting. There's institutions are not buying at the top end. So yes, is the Tate buying Indian art? Yes, they are, but they're very focused on a particular genre, a particular area. They won't come out and, at least for Indian art, they won't come out and buy a 5 million Tayyab or a 5 million Gaitonde.
What will they buy instead?
Should I give the strategy up?
Maybe you can give us just a little taste.
No, so I think they would buy something like Zarina Hashmi. They would buy something like Jangar Sham Singh, which is a tribal artist. So I think their focus is a little different.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of this private collectors,
but they would love donations of the Tayyabs and Gaitondes.
Right. And in terms of the private collectors who are coming in, are they ones who are new to art buying, or are they sort of people who are trying to fill in gaps into their sort of more encyclopedic collections, a bit like institutions are already? Is there a mix?
It's a mix.
Thanks. Thank you. We have one here.
Hello. My question is to Mr. Dinesh. As you just mentioned about the fake artworks, so I just wanted to know more on it. Now, for instance, if we take Gaitonde, he has done a limited number of works in his lifetime, so they might have catalogized on and more. But for instance, if we take artist Hussein, a young collector like me, if I come across Hussein artworks with the provenance collected directly from the artist, so how do I verify the authenticity?
I think the only way to avoid fakes is to buy from somewhere where you've got recourse.
Mm-hmm.
If you and secondly, don't buy in cash, because then you have no recourse.
Of course.
So buy from a reputed gallery, buy from a reputed auction house. So in case in the event, everyone's human. So you might go wrong, but at least you have recourse.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back to those people and say, look, this is the evidence I have, this is the research I have, and learn yourself also a little bit as you go along. But always buy from a place where you have recourse and which is reputed.
But sometimes,
and of course, if the work is published in a book, that's even better. Not that there aren't books out there with fakes.
But sometimes, we come across art dealers or maybe direct collectors who bought directly from the artist, they kept it with themselves, and now they have decided to, let go in the market. And those are some beautiful works. So how do I verify? Like, you are an expert, but I am not so. So whom do I approach in this case?
So there are lots of experts around and consultants around who you can lean on, who have the knowledge. So lean on them. You choose the one that you can work comfortably with, an expert or consultant, you can lean on them. And I would always be a little wary of a provenance which says bought directly from the artist or bought from a Maharaja is the most common. So I would just be a little careful as to what the provenance is.
Okay.
Because provenance, all it means is chain of ownership.
Yes.
So who owned it until you got the painting?
Of course. Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Yes, I think gentlemen here.
Actually,
do you need a microphone? Yeah, there we go.
Yes. Bye.
Do you have the questions?
Bye. So now I just don't know. So
should I just?
Yep. Do you want to go first, maybe? And so, no, you go first.
Can I go?
Yeah, of course.
This is loud. Hi. Well, Kiran, fantastic. I think you just asked lovely questions. It was really interactive. This is my first time I've come to an art fair.
right? I'm a self-made man who shifted to Dubai 12 years back and made my money in manufacturing. And I'm really surprised with the knowledge everyone has of how young entrepreneurs who've just made money are coming inside art, even though they don't understand art. It's just like you have exact words said across. But compliments to you, Kiran. I think this interaction was amazing. Your questions are fantastic. So it was really good. Compliments to you. Dinesh, it's really inspiring to see this. This is the first show I've come to, right? And it's fantastic. I've heard the first one was a blast, but second one is outstanding, right? So I'm really happy for you and for your team because as NRIs, we live in Dubai. It's just 3 hours away from India. As NRIs, we have a very limited understanding of art, and especially people like me who fail to understand it. But my questions are very commercial. I mean, I don't know. I'm an entrepreneur, so I have to be commercial about my questions. The very first one, of course, is Sam, to you. Is there any tax limit if you move art from India to Dubai? Is there any bracket to it? Is there any limitation to it? Is there, if higher amount has been moved, is there any taxation to it? It can be online or offline. I can meet also.
So there is no taxes in India if you export art from India to a place outside India. Now, usually what happens is there's a customs duty in that country, right? Dubai, I would presume, would have a lower minimal customs duty. So you may be lucky that you're there. But in a country which is a high tax jurisdiction, there could be a higher tax on entry of that artwork. Because we're talking about high valuation items, right? The other thing that you would have to look at, and that is, it's obviously safer when you buy from an auction house or a registered dealer, is that often customs authorities can doubt valuations. But if you buy from respected dealers, that valuation generally holds.
Yeah.
But from India, you won't pay tax to get art out because GST is exempt when you export.
Fantastic. So my understanding of art is really less. I've made my money, so I put my money in Ritz-Carlton Pune Art Gallery, where I have Shraddha, who's a fantastic partner and expert to get me the most genuine ones because I fail to understand art very much. But what about from India, from Dubai, if I have to send India, is there any limits that keep crossing? I'm sorry, I just have two questions more.
So from Dubai to India, very quickly, there are no exemptions if you are not the artist. I think Dinesh talked about it. You bring even Indian work back to India, you have to pay customs duty. If you are the author or the originator or the artist of that artwork and you bring it back to India, then there is an exemption. But for a person who is an owner or a collector, there is no exemption. So you bring it back, you pay customs duty.
Collector getting it to India for sale?
Yeah. So you get into India, you pay a 10% customs duty, you pay a 12% GST on top of that. When you sell it, you can set off your GST, so that 10% remains a cost.
22%. Okay.
I'm going to have to move on the questions now. If you have further questions.
Last one for
Sam.
Dinesh. Last one.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Very quick. I'm conscious of time.
Dinesh, I think Art Mumbai is doing great, right? And we've been talking about global expansion. So is there any look forward for Art Dubai that can come up? And this is also a proposal, not just a question.
Maybe I'll think about it after the 17th when I get some sleep.
All right. Thank you, guys.
And sorry, you had one as well.
Yes.
Hi.
Thank you. I almost forgot my question. No offense. Okay, so, in the whole discussion that we had just now, I think one of the things that was established that on the consumption side of the market, speculation is one of the things that kind of is slowing down, or it's a hindrance to the growth. I would just like to understand what about on the supply side of the market in terms of the opacity and what we can do or what the ecosystem can do to kind of reduce that level of opacity. First of all, understanding how much that's affecting the growth of the market itself. That's one thing. And the second thing, sir, to you is because you're on the data side of things, what role does that opacity play in the data side of things? And then also, how much does that hinder the ability to then make predictions? Because then you're always looking at a very small percentage. When you're looking at auction, it's always a percentage of the market. So, how would that then affect in terms of predictions and market value? That's
Two very good questions. Should we start with your first question? Was, I guess, directed to everyone.
Just say it briefly again.
The first question was sort of more about how is opacity in the market maybe changing? Yeah.
Price opacity, basically on the supply side. The information was very withheld and limited to a certain number or percentage of the total market. So I'm saying if that information is no longer opaque and it's more transparent, would that help in boosting the Indian market? And yeah.
I mean, of course it would, but then you have to ask people like galleries to tell you what prices they sold things at.
I'm struggling with that right now.
That's probably what you ask. Auction data is the only data that you can really use. It's public data, and it's for public consumption. To actually, and Anders can say more about it, to actually have more data on transactions will definitely boost the market, give more confidence.
Okay.
But it's very difficult to get it.
But just from that, why is there this level of hesitation or opacity?
Because buyers are private. Buyers don't want galleries to let other people know what they bought something at, especially at the values that they buy.
There is also more to it, though. I mean, dealers, they want to withhold the price because they will often quote different prices for different buyers as well. If you're an institution, if you're just entering the market, I think, the art market is very much run on sort of an asymmetry of information. And the dealer always has to know more than the collector to justify the price they're often asking. No. Dinesh, also to that point, obviously you say that dealers have to sort of reveal prices more. You are an auction house, but I'm sure you also conduct private sales, as all auction houses do. Do you publish that data?
No, we don't. I mean, the reason is only because, like I said, the buyers won't let us.
Of course.
It's their prerogative, not ours.
Of course, but it isn't just a gallery exclusive thing, right? And Anders, maybe you want to speak to the second question. Do you need to repeat it, or you're good? Yeah,
I think I kind of remember it. Well, first of all, I think this opacity or non-transparency, I think, is a major hurdle in general. I mean, there's a lot of the work we do between the wealth management sector, for example, and the art world and collectibles, etc., is the biggest hurdle. A friction point is transparency. You're dealing with a regulated market versus a non-regulated. Now, when it comes to the data, I think our approach has been, since we started, was not relying purely on auction data. And then obviously there's a private market. But I think it's one of the things when you're trying to build a market is also to understand where value is coming from. And the value, yes, is driven to a certain extent, is embedded in the price. But there are a lot of other data points. And this is where we're focusing on biographical data, the actual data within the artwork itself, looking at media-related data, what is being said. And then in our case, we started in 2004 by surveying people. That's our main way. You mentioned crowdsourcing for information. Not as a sort of a given, like this is the truth. It's to try to find out where the balance of the market is, and to try to harvest intelligence from people in the market in an anonymous way, not to point at that person said something. And we use that to layer the information. Now, a lot of the stuff we're doing, in addition to actually doing, data, is education, and is to try to make people to understand why did that work at Saffron Art sell at this particular price. And I think obviously sometimes it's history, and the contemporary art market is much more fluid because that's the history is being written as we speak. And I think that is an important part for when you educate a new generation of buyers, is to have data that, and you can see now there's a much more, there's platforms coming around looking at much more broader data sets. And obviously with AI, etc., there will be potentially an opportunity to process that data in a better way. I do think it's important that instead of simply relying on AI, is that we need to somehow understand what's going to go into that box before we let someone else just kind of do that for us.
Thank you. And thank you for those great questions. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I'm sorry. I'm very conscious of people's time. Yeah, in front of me, right there. Yeah.
Yeah, Dinesh, just as a benchmark figure, how much should one allocate of his assets in percentage terms in art?
If you ask me, I would put all of it into art.
No, just for a new collector, who's coming in the market, 5%, 10%.
We talk about a 3% rule, right? 3% of net worth, should go or not. That's about the general.
That's
three to
the
four.
worldwide. That's the worldwide rule. I mean, taking aside major collectors who put a lot more into art.
Okay, fine. We can have two more questions, and please feel free to leave. I know you all have busy schedules.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I have one question. In India, I think some artists are considered as national treasures. I think there are 9, if I remember well. What do you think about this measure, and how does it impact the market for these artists? Is it a limitation?
It did impact the market when there weren't this large pool of Indian buyers, because for national art treasures, you can't export them out of India. So it has to be Indian buyers in India. But I don't think it's affected it that much, really, if you look at it. An example is, Rabindranath Tagore is a national art treasure, and his price is at its peak. Amrita Shekhar, the same thing. So I think there's enough domestic consumption that it doesn't affect the market of these national art treasures, if that was your question.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to my wonderful panel.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.